The blood on Zachary Sullivan's hands never truly washed clean, no matter how many times he scrubbed them raw in creek water under the Nevada sky. He stood at the edge of McGill in 1884, a mining town that had sprung up like a weed in the desert, watching the sun burn orange against the distant mountains. Every person he had ever loved was dead, and he had made his peace with that being the natural order of things. Love was a noose that tightened slowly, and he had cut himself free before it could finish the job. The saloon behind him erupted with laughter, but Zachary felt nothing. He had worked as a hired gun for 3 years now, drifting from town to town, taking jobs that required a steady hand and a heart that did not flinch. At 26 years old, he had already lived several lifetimes worth of violence. His parents had died of fever when he was 12. His younger sister had been caught in crossfire during a bank robbery in Denver when he was 20. The woman he had planned to marry had taken ill with consumption and withered away in front of him 2 years after that. Each loss had carved away another piece of his ability to feel, until all that remained was a hollow certainty that attachment was the root of all suffering. He touched the brim of his hat to an elderly woman passing by, because manners cost nothing and meant even less. She smiled at him, but her eyes held that familiar wariness people got when they sensed something broken in a person. Zachary did not blame her. He knew what he was. Sullivan. The voice belonged to Raymond Hicks, the owner of the Lucky Strike mine. Zachary turned slowly, his hand instinctively checking the position of his revolver. Old habits. Got a job for you if you are interested. Good pay. Money was the only thing Zachary needed anymore. Money bought food, shelter, and distance from other people. I am listening. Hicks gestured toward the general store. Got a shipment coming in tomorrow. High-value supplies for the mine. Heard some of the Fletcher gang might be planning to hit it. Need someone to ride shotgun, make sure everything arrives intact. The Fletcher gang was notorious in this part of Nevada, a collection of thieves and killers who preyed on mining operations. Dangerous work, which meant Hicks would pay well. Zachary nodded once. $500, $300, $400, and I keep any weapons I take off them. Hicks chewed his lip, calculating. Done. Be at the store at dawn. The handshake was brief, businesslike. Zachary preferred it that way. He collected his horse from the livery, a gray gelding he had won in a poker game, and rode out to his camp beyond the edge of town. He did not sleep in the boarding house or the hotel. Being surrounded by walls made him feel trapped, and hearing families through thin walls, hearing their laughter and arguments and all the messy evidence of their attachments, made something twist uncomfortably in his chest. Under the stars, with his bedroll on hard ground and his gun within reach, Zachary could breathe. He made coffee over a small fire and ate hardtack without tasting it. The moon rose full and bright, painting the desert silver, beautiful in its way. He could appreciate beauty from a distance, could observe it without needing to possess it. That was the trick. Never reach for anything. Never need anything. Need was weakness, and weakness led to suffering. He slept lightly, as he always did, and woke before sunrise. The ride back into McGill took 20 minutes, and the town was just beginning to stir when he arrived at the general store. A wagon stood ready, hitched to a team of 4 horses. The driver was a weathered man named Tom Sterling, who Zachary had worked with before on similar jobs. Tom was taciturn by nature, which suited Zachary fine. "Morning," Tom grunted. "Morning." They were loading the last crates when she appeared. Harriet Monroe was small, barely 5 feet tall, with auburn hair pinned up in a practical bun and green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wore a simple calico dress and carried a carpet bag, and she walked directly up to the wagon with the confidence of someone who had never been told, She was not allowed somewhere. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear and firm. "Is this the supply wagon heading to the Fletcher Ranch?" Tom shook his head. "No, miss. This is going to the Lucky Strike mine. Fletcher Ranch is about 20 miles east of here. You would need to catch the stage, but that does not run until Wednesday." Zachary saw the flicker of dismay cross her face before she composed herself. She could not have been more than 23 or 24, young enough that hope had not yet been beaten out of her, old enough to be traveling alone. That alone told him she was either brave or desperate, possibly both. "I see," she said quietly. "Is there anyone in town who might be willing to take me? I can pay." "Fletcher Ranch is in the opposite direction from where we are heading," Tom said, not unkindly. "Most folks heading that way would have left already." Zachary knew he should stay silent. Knew he should let her figure out her own problems. But something about the set of her shoulders, the way she was clearly disappointed but not defeated, made him speak before he could stop himself. "What is at the Fletcher Ranch?" he asked. She turned those green eyes on him, and Zachary felt something shift in his chest, a sensation like a rusty hinge moving for the first time in years. "I am a school teacher," she said. "The Fletcher family hired me to teach their children and the children of their workers. I was supposed to arrive yesterday, but the stage broke an axle outside of Ely and I had to wait for another. Now I have missed my connection." A school teacher. Of course. Zachary could see it now, the education in her bearing, the determination that came from believing knowledge could change lives. He had met teachers before, good people who thought they could civilize the West one child at a time. They usually learned better, but he admired the stubbornness of their optimism. "The stage runs Wednesday," Tom repeated. "That is only 2 days. I am sure the Fletchers will understand." But Harriet shook her head. "They paid for my travel from Ohio. I gave them my word I would arrive by Monday at the latest. Breaking my word is not something I take lightly." There it was, that old-fashioned integrity that Zachary thought had died out along with so many other things. She meant it too. He could see it in the tension in her jaw, the straightness of her spine. 2 more days of waiting would feel like failure to her, even though the delay was not her fault. He was going to regret this. He knew it with the same certainty he knew the sun would rise. But his mouth opened anyway, and the words came out. "I can take you after this job is done. We deliver to the mine, collect payment, then I will ride you to the Fletcher Ranch. Add another $100 to my fee," he added, looking at Tom and then back at Harriet. Tom raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Harriet's expression brightened immediately, hope flooding back into those green eyes. "Truly, you would do that for $100, yes." He kept his voice flat, businesslike. This was a transaction, nothing more. He was not doing this to help her, not really. He was doing it for the money. That was what he told himself. "That is very generous," Harriet said, reaching into her bag. "I can pay you half now and half when we arrive." Zachary shook his head. "Pay me when we get there. If something happens and I cannot get you there, no point in you losing money." She studied him for a long moment, and Zachary had the uncomfortable sensation of being truly seen, as if she could look past his carefully constructed walls and see all the broken pieces underneath. But she just nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan, Zachary Sullivan." "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. I am Harriet Monroe." They did not shake hands. Zachary turned back to the wagon, securing the last of the ropes around the crates. Tom was watching him with something that might have been amusement, which Zachary ignored. He checked his rifle, his revolvers, the knife in his boot. Everything was in order. "You can wait inside the store," Zachary told Harriet. "We will be back in about 4 hours if everything goes smoothly." "May I come with you?" The question surprised him. Harriet must have seen his expression because she hurried to explain. "I promise I will not be any trouble. It is just that sitting and waiting makes me anxious, and I would rather be moving forward, even if it is not in the right direction yet. I will stay in the wagon and keep out of your way." Every instinct told Zachary to say no. Taking a woman into potential danger was foolish, and having someone to protect would complicate things if the Fletcher gang did show up. But there was something about the earnestness in her request, the admission of anxiety, that made him hesitate. Tom shrugged when Zachary glanced at him. "Her choice if she wants to come. Probably be safer with us than sitting alone in town anyway if those boys are around." It was not sound reasoning, but Zachary found himself nodding. "Stay in the wagon bed. If shooting starts, you get down and stay down." "Understood." "Understood," Harriet said, and there was a smile pulling at the corners of her mouth, grateful and genuine. Zachary helped her up into the back of the wagon, making sure she was settled among the crates where she would have some protection if needed. Her hand in his was small and warm, and he released it as soon as she was secure, disturbed by how much he had noticed that warmth. Tom took the reins, and Zachary swung up onto his horse. The ride to the Lucky Strike mine followed the main road north for about an hour, then branched off onto a rougher path that wound into the hills. The morning was cool, the sky a perfect cloudless blue. Zachary rode ahead of the wagon, scanning the landscape for any sign of trouble. Behind him, he could hear Harriet talking quietly to Tom. She was asking him about McGill, about the mine, about the people in town. Tom, surprisingly, was answering. Not with long explanations, but with enough detail that Zachary could tell he did not mind her questions. There was something about her curiosity that felt genuine, not like she was prying, but like she truly wanted to understand this place she found herself in. "Have you lived in Nevada long, Mr. Sullivan?" Her voice carried forward, and Zachary realized she was talking to him now. He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "A few years." "Where are you from originally?" "Kansas." The word was clipped, discouraging further questions. Kansas meant his childhood home, meant his parents' graves, meant everything he had spent years trying to forget. But Harriet, it seemed, did not take hints easily. "I have never been to Kansas. Is it very different from here?" "Greener," Zachary said shortly. "I imagine everything is greener than here," Harriet replied, and there was a note of humor in her voice. "Though there is something striking about the desert, do you not think? The way everything that survives here is strong. It has to be." Zachary glanced back at her despite himself. She was looking out at the landscape with genuine interest, not the disdain most people from back east showed when confronted with the harsh reality of the Nevada desert. She meant what she said. She saw beauty in this unforgiving place. He turned back to the road without responding, but something about her words stayed with him. Everything that survives here is strong. It was true. Nothing soft lasted in the West. You either hardened yourself or you broke. He had chosen hardness years ago, had turned himself into something that could not be broken because there was nothing left to break. The mine came into view around midday, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around the entrance to the shaft. Men were moving in and out, pushing ore carts, operating equipment. It was backbreaking work in dangerous conditions, but it paid better than most jobs out here, and that was enough for most men. Raymond Hicks came out of the main office building when he saw the wagon approaching. He looked relieved, which told Zachary he had genuinely been worried about the shipment being hit. "Any trouble?" "No," Zachary said, dismounting. "Quiet ride." The unloading took about 20 minutes. Zachary kept watch while Tom and some of the miners transferred the crates into the storage building. Harriet remained in the wagon as she had been told, but he caught her watching everything with that same quiet curiosity. She was taking in the operation of the mine, the dynamics between the workers, cataloging information the way someone who was used to learning would. When the wagon was empty, Hicks counted out $400 into Zachary's palm. The money was already spent in his mind, allocated to future supplies, future needs, the endless practical requirements of staying alive and moving. He pocketed it without ceremony. "Appreciate your help, Sullivan," Hicks said. "If you are around, I will have another shipment next month." Zachary nodded noncommittally. He was never sure where he would be next month, next week, tomorrow. Drifting was easier than settling. You could not lose a home you never had. Tom drove the empty wagon back toward McGill, and Zachary rode alongside. Harriet had gone quiet, and when Zachary looked back, he saw that she had fallen asleep, her head resting against one of the crate supports, her face peaceful in sleep. The hard ride from Ely must have exhausted her more than she had let on. There was something vulnerable about her like this, something that made Zachary want to look away and keep looking at the same time. He forced his attention back to the road. The last thing he needed was to start caring about a stranger, especially one he would be rid of in a few hours. He would take her to the Fletcher ranch, collect his money, and ride away. Simple, clean, no complications. They reached McGill by mid-afternoon. The sound of the wagon stopping woke Harriet, and she sat up quickly, looking momentarily disoriented before remembering where she was. "Oh, I apologize. I did not mean to fall asleep." "No harm done," Tom said. "You looked like you needed it." Zachary was already off his horse, checking his supplies. The ride to Fletcher Ranch would take about 3 hours, which would get them there just before sunset if they left soon. "We should go now if you want to arrive before dark." Harriet gathered her carpet bag and climbed down from the wagon with Tom's help. She looked up at Zachary, and there was something almost apologetic in her expression. "I should have asked earlier, but has your horse been rested enough?" "I do not want to push the animal if he needs more time." The consideration surprised him. Most people would not think to ask about the horse, would just assume whatever they needed was more important. "He is fine," Zachary said, "but you will need to ride with me." No sense bringing another horse for such a short distance. He saw the moment of hesitation, the quick calculation she was making. A young woman, alone with a strange man she had just met, riding together for hours. It was not proper by any measure, and they both knew it. But propriety often came second to practicality out here, and Harriet seemed to understand that. "All right," she said simply. Zachary mounted first, then reached down to pull her up behind him. She settled onto the horse's back, her carpet bag clutched in one hand, the other gripping his shoulder for balance. He could feel the warmth of her even through his shirt and vest, could smell something floral that must have been soap or perfume. It had been a long time since he had been this close to anyone, and his body was responding to the proximity in ways he did not appreciate. "Hold on," he said gruffly, and he felt her free hand come around his waist, tentative at first, then firmer as they started moving. They rode east out of McGill, following the main road until it forked, then taking the northern branch that would eventually lead to Fletcher Ranch. The landscape was all sagebrush and rocky outcroppings, mountains rising in the distance like jagged teeth. The sun was beginning its descent, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. For the first hour, neither of them spoke. Zachary focused on the road, on keeping a steady pace that would not exhaust the horse. Behind him, Harriet was quiet, but he was acutely aware of her presence, the way she moved with the rhythm of the horse's gait, the occasional shift of her hand against his side. "May I ask you something, Mr. Sullivan?" Her voice was soft, almost tentative. He wanted to say no, wanted to keep the silence between them that would make it easier to say goodbye, but instead he said, "What Why did you offer to help me? The truth, I mean, not just for the money." Zachary's jaw tightened. She was perceptive, he would give her that. "The money is reason enough." "Perhaps," Harriet said, "but I think you would have done it even if I could not pay you. You do not seem like someone who does things unless you choose to." "You do not know anything about me." "No," she agreed, "but I am trying to understand. You seem like someone who works very hard not to care about anything, but then you do something kind, and I wonder what made you decide caring was dangerous." The words hit too close to home, cut too near to truths Zachary had buried deep. He pulled the horse to a stop and turned in the saddle to look at her. "I am not kind," he said flatly, "and I do not care. I saw someone who needed to get somewhere, saw an opportunity to make money and took it. That is all. Do not make me into something I am not." Harriet met his gaze steadily, and there was no fear in her eyes, no shrinking away from his harshness. "If you say so, Mr. Sullivan." But there was something in her tone that suggested she did not believe him, and that made Zachary angrier than it should have. He turned back around and urged the horse forward, faster this time, as if he could outrun her gentle probing into his motivations. They rode in silence for another mile before Harriet spoke again, and when she did, her voice was different, more careful. "I apologize. I did not mean to pry or to make assumptions. My mother always said my curiosity would get me into trouble someday. I should not have said those things." The apology surprised him. It was genuine, not manipulative, and it took some of the edge off his anger. Zachary sighed. "You said I do not seem like someone who does things unless I choose to. You were right about that, at least. I choose everything I do. I choose to be alone. I choose to keep moving. I choose not to let anyone get close enough to matter." "Why?" The question was barely a whisper. "Because everyone I ever cared about died," Zachary said bluntly. "Parents, sister, my fiancé. Every single person I loved is dead, and loving them did not save them. It just meant I had to feel it when they were gone. So I stopped loving, stopped caring, and I stopped suffering." The words hung in the air between them. Zachary had never said them out loud before, had never articulated the philosophy that governed his life. He did not know why he was telling this stranger, this woman he would never see again after today. Maybe because she had asked. Maybe because she had seen through him so easily that lying felt pointless. "I am so sorry," Harriet said, and her hand tightened slightly against his side, a gesture of comfort that Zachary did not pull away from even though he should have. "That is an unbearable amount of loss for one person." "It is just the way things are," Zachary said. "People die, especially out here. Getting attached just makes it hurt more." "But does not being attached hurt too?" Harriet asked. "Not in the same way, but does not it hurt to be alone?" Zachary wanted to say no, wanted to tell her he was perfectly fine with his solitude, that he preferred it. But the lie would not come. "Maybe," he admitted, "but it is a hurt I can control. I cannot control who lives and who dies, but I can control whether I let anyone close enough to destroy me when they are gone. That seems like a very lonely way to live. It is a safe way to live." Harriet was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. "I suppose we all make choices about what risks we are willing to take. You decided the risk of loving people is not worth the pain of losing them. I decided that living without connection is more frightening than any loss could be. Neither of us is wrong. We just chose different kinds of courage." Her words settled into him uncomfortably. He had never thought of his isolation as a choice, as something that required its own kind of courage. He had always framed it as simple survival, as the obvious path forward. But the way Harriet described it made it sound like he was not just protecting himself, but actively running from something. "You think it is courageous to set yourself up for heartbreak?" he asked, unable to keep the skepticism from his voice. "I think it is courageous to believe that joy is worth the risk of sorrow," Harriet said. "I think it takes strength to open your heart knowing it might be broken, but I also think it takes strength to close your heart and walk through the world alone. I just hope that closing your heart protects you the way you think it does." Zachary had no answer for that. They rode on, the sun sinking lower, the shadows growing longer. He thought about his life, about the years since he had lost Anna, his fiancée. Had he been happy? No. But he had not been devastated either. He had been numb, which was not the same as at peace but felt safer. Numbness did not ambush you in the middle of the night. It did not tear you apart when you saw a woman wearing the same color dress she used to favor or heard a laugh that sounded like hers. But numbness was not joy either. He had given up the possibility of joy to avoid the certainty of pain. That was the trade he had made, and until this moment it had seemed like a good deal. "Why did you come west?" he asked, surprising himself. He did not usually care about other people's stories, but he found himself wanting to know hers. "Ohio is a long way from Nevada. My parents died last year," Harriet said quietly. "Fever like your parents. There was nothing left for me there except memories, and I thought maybe if I went somewhere completely new, somewhere they had never been, it might hurt less. Also," and here her voice brightened slightly, "I have always wanted to teach. There are plenty of teachers in Ohio, but out here, teachers are needed. I like the idea of being useful, of making a difference." "So you ran away," Zachary said. "So I ran towards something," Harriet corrected. "There is a difference." Maybe there was. Zachary had been running away for years, fleeing from the ghosts of his past, from the memories that still woke him in the night. He had never thought about what it might mean to run toward something instead, to move with purpose rather than simply trying to escape. The Fletcher Ranch appeared in the distance as the sun touched the horizon, a collection of buildings that looked substantial even from a distance. This was clearly not just a homestead but a working cattle operation, probably one of the bigger spreads in this part of Nevada. Zachary guided the horse toward the main house, a two-story structure with a wide porch and multiple windows that glowed with lamplight. As they approached, a man stepped out onto the porch. He was middle-aged, weathered by sun and work, with the bearing of someone used to giving orders. He had a rifle in his hands, not pointed at them but clearly ready. "That is close enough," the man called out. "State your business." Zachary brought the horse to a halt about 20 feet from the porch, keeping his hands visible. "My name is Zachary Sullivan. I am bringing Miss Harriet Monroe. She was hired to teach your children." The man's expression changed immediately, and he set the rifle aside. "Miss Monroe, thank the Lord. We were starting to worry something had happened to you." He came down the steps, and as he got closer, Zachary could see the relief in his face. "I am Charles Fletcher. My wife has been beside herself with worry." Zachary dismounted first, then helped Harriet down. She smoothed her dress and stepped forward with a smile. "Mr. Fletcher, I apologize for my late arrival. There was some trouble with the stage and I had to find alternate transportation." "No apology necessary as long as you are safe," Charles said warmly. "Please, come inside. My wife will want to meet you properly." He looked at Zachary. "You as well, Mr. Sullivan. The least we can do is offer you supper and a place to stay tonight after you brought Miss Monroe all this way." Zachary was already shaking his head. "That is not necessary. If you could just pay Miss Monroe what you owe me, I will be on my way." "Nonsense," Charles said firmly. "It will be full dark in half an hour. Only a fool travels this country at night when he does not have to. You will stay, eat a proper meal, and leave in the morning. I insist." It went against every instinct Zachary had to accept. Staying meant conversation, meant being drawn into the warm circle of a family, meant risking the kind of connection he had spent years avoiding. But Charles was right that traveling at night was dangerous, and his horse genuinely did need rest after the long day. "Just tonight," Zachary said finally. "I leave at first light." "Agreed," Charles said, looking satisfied. He gestured toward the house. "Come on, then. My wife Martha has dinner almost ready, and our children are eager to meet their new teacher." They followed him inside, and Zachary was immediately struck by the warmth of the place. Not just the physical warmth from the fireplace and the stove, but the intangible warmth that came from a home where people loved each other. There were children's drawings pinned to one wall, a well-worn book lying open on a side table, the smell of cooking food and fresh bread. It was everything Zachary had given up, everything he had convinced himself he did not want. Martha Fletcher emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a handsome woman in her 40s with kind eyes and gray streaking through her brown hair. "Miss Monroe, oh, we are so glad you are here safely." She clasped Harriet's hands warmly. "And you must be the man who brought her. Mr. Sullivan, was it?" "Yes, madam." "Well, you are a blessing, Mr. Sullivan. Please sit down, dinner is ready." Before Zachary could protest, he found himself being ushered to a large dining table where 4 children were already seated, ranging in age from about 6 to 14. They all looked at him and Harriet with open curiosity. Charles made introductions while Martha brought out platters of food: roasted chicken, potatoes, greens, fresh bread. It was more food than Zachary usually saw in a week, and despite himself, his stomach growled. "Grace first," Martha said, and everyone bowed their heads. Zachary did the same automatically, the old habit from childhood still ingrained despite the years. Martha's prayer was simple and heartfelt, thanking God for the food, for Harriet's safe arrival, for the stranger who had helped her reach them. Then the meal began, and it was loud and chaotic in the way family dinners were, with children talking over each other, parents gently correcting manners, laughter erupting at small jokes. Zachary ate quietly, trying to be as invisible as possible, but he kept noticing things. The way Charles and Martha exchanged glances that communicated whole conversations without words. The way the oldest boy, Thomas, helped his youngest sister cut her meat without being asked. The easy affection that flowed between all of them, natural as breathing. And he noticed Harriet, who had slipped into the dynamic as easily as if she had always been part of it. She was answering questions about Ohio, about what she would teach them, making the younger children laugh with funny voices and putting the older ones at ease by treating them like the young adults they were becoming. She was good at this, at connecting with people, at making them feel seen and valued. "So, Mr. Sullivan," Charles said, drawing Zachary's attention, "what brings you to this part of Nevada? Are you working one of the mines?" "I do different jobs," Zachary said vaguely. "Whatever needs doing and pays fair." "He is being modest," Harriet interjected, and Zachary shot her a warning look that she completely ignored. "He works as a guard for valuable shipments, and he was kind enough to bring me here even though it was out of his way, just because I needed help." "That is good of you," Martha said warmly. "There are not enough men willing to go out of their way for others anymore." Zachary shifted uncomfortably. "I was paid for my trouble." "Even so," Martha insisted. "You could have said no. The fact that you said yes speaks to your character." He wanted to argue, wanted to tell them they were wrong about him, that he had no character to speak of. But they were all looking at him with such open friendliness that contradiction seemed churlish. So he just nodded and focused on his food, letting the conversation flow around him. After dinner, Charles showed Zachary to a small room off the back of the house that was used for storage and occasional guests. It had a real bed with a mattress and blankets, a window with curtains, a washstand with clean water. Luxury by Zachary's standards. "Breakfast is at 6, Charles said. "But if you need to leave earlier, just help yourself to anything in the kitchen." "I appreciate your hospitality," Zachary said, meaning it. Charles paused in the doorway. "That woman you brought here, Miss Monroe, she seems like a good person. Genuine." "She is," Zachary said before he could stop himself. "And you?" Charles asked. "Are you a good person, Mr. Sullivan?" The question was not accusatory, just curious, but it made Zachary tense. "I do not know any more," he said honestly. "I try not to be a bad one." Charles nodded slowly. "That is something, at least. Good night, Mr. Sullivan." After he left, Zachary sat on the edge of the bed and pulled off his boots. The room was quiet except for the muffled sounds of the family settling down for the night. He could hear Martha singing softly to one of the younger children, could hear the murmur of conversation between Charles and Thomas about work that needed doing tomorrow. This was what he had given up. This warmth, this connection, this sense of belonging to something larger than himself. And suddenly, for the first time in years, Zachary felt the full weight of what he had lost. Not just Anna, not just his family, but the possibility of building something like what the Fletchers had. He had been so focused on avoiding pain that he had not let himself think about what else he was avoiding. He thought about what Harriet had said, about choosing different kinds of courage. Was he courageous, or was he just a coward hiding behind philosophy? The question troubled him more than it should have. Sleep did not come easily. Zachary lay in the unfamiliar comfort of the real bed, staring at the ceiling, thoughts circling. He should leave before breakfast, get on his horse and ride away before this family's warmth could seep any deeper into him. He should take his money from Harriet and disappear, go back to his solitary existence where nothing touched him and nothing hurt. But when morning came and the house began to stir, Zachary found himself washing his face, putting on his boots, and walking into the kitchen instead of walking out the door. Martha was already cooking, and the smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air. "Good morning, Mr. Sullivan," she said with a smile. "I hope you slept well." "Yes, madam, thank you. Sit down. Breakfast will be ready shortly." Zachary sat at the table, accepting the cup of coffee Martha poured for him. The children came in one by one, still sleep rumpled, and then Charles appeared, followed by Harriet. She had changed into a fresh dress, her hair redone, and she looked rested in a way she had not yesterday. When she saw Zachary, her face lit up with a smile that did something uncomfortable to his chest. "Good morning, Mr. Sullivan. I thought you might have left already." "Not yet," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. Breakfast was another family affair, noisy and warm. After the meal, Charles excused himself and the older children to start the day's work. Martha began clearing the table and Harriet moved to help her, but Martha waved her off. "You have had a long journey, dear. Why do not you and Mr. Sullivan take a walk? I will show you the school room after." It was clearly a polite dismissal, giving them a chance to say goodbye privately. Harriet looked at Zachary questioningly, and he found himself nodding. They walked out onto the porch and then beyond, toward a small creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property. The morning was cool and clear, the sun just beginning to warm the air. They walked in silence for a few minutes, and Zachary tried to figure out what he wanted to say. He should thank her for the job, take his money, and leave. Simple. Professional. "I have your payment," Harriet said, reaching into her pocket and pulling out a small leather pouch. $100, as we agreed." Zachary took the pouch, weighing it in his hand. It felt heavier than it should, more significant. "Thank you." "No, thank you," Harriet said earnestly. "You helped me keep my word to the Fletchers. That means more to me than you probably understand." They had reached the creek, and they both stopped, looking down at the water sliding over smooth stones. Zachary knew he should say goodbye now, knew he should turn around and walk back to his horse. But his feet would not move. "I think I was wrong," Harriet said quietly. "Yesterday, when I said closing your heart takes courage, I do not think it does, not really. I think it takes courage to open your heart again after it has been broken. And I think you have that courage, Mr. Sullivan, even if you do not believe you do." Zachary's throat tightened. "You do not know what you are talking about." "Maybe not," Harriet agreed, "but I see the way you are with people when you think they are not watching. You are careful with them, gentle in your own way. You pretend not to care, but I think you care very much, and that is what scares you." "Stop," Zachary said, his voice rough, but Harriet took a step closer, looking up at him with those clear green eyes. "I am not saying you need to change. I am just saying that maybe suffering did not end when you stopped caring. Maybe it just changed into a different kind of suffering. And maybe, if you let yourself, you could find something better than either." Zachary wanted to argue, wanted to push her away with harsh words. But he could not because, somewhere deep inside, he knew she was right. He had been suffering all these years, just in a way he had convinced himself was manageable. He had traded the sharp agony of loss for the dull ache of loneliness, and he had told himself it was a fair exchange. "I do not know how to do this anymore," he said, the admission torn from somewhere vulnerable he had thought was dead. "I do not know how to care about someone without waiting for them to leave." "You do not have to know how," Harriet said softly. "You just have to be willing to try." They stood there by the creek, and Zachary felt something cracking open inside him, years of carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. It was terrifying, but it was also, in a strange way, a relief. He had been holding himself together for so long, had been so vigilant about keeping everyone at a distance, and he was so tired. "I am not good for you," he said. "I am not good for anyone." "That is not your decision to make," Harriet said. "I get to decide what is good for me. And I think you are a better man than you give yourself credit for." Zachary looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something in her face that made his breath catch. Interest, affection, maybe even the beginning of something deeper. She was not afraid of him, not put off by his brokenness. She saw it all and was still standing here, still offering him something he had convinced himself he did not deserve. "Stay," Harriet said. "Just for a few days. The Fletchers would not mind, I am sure. Give yourself a chance to rest, to be around people who care. You do not have to be alone all the time." Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to get on his horse and ride away while he still could. But a quieter voice, one he had not heard in years, was suggesting something different. What if she was right? What if there was another way to live, one that did not require him to be either devastated or numb? "I will stay 2 days," Zachary heard himself say. "Then I need to move on." The smile that broke across Harriet's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. 2 days. That is a start. They walked back to the house together, and Zachary tried to ignore the feeling that he had just made either the best or the worst decision of his life. Charles and Martha did not seem surprised when he asked if he could stay a bit longer, and they immediately set him to work helping with repairs around the ranch. It felt good to work with his hands on something constructive rather than destructive, to build instead of guard or threaten. Harriet spent her days getting to know the children and setting up the school room in a converted storage building. Zachary found excuses to walk past while she was working, and each time she would look up and smile at him, sometimes calling him over to ask his opinion on where something should go or what he thought the children would enjoy learning about. "I do not know anything about teaching," he protested the third time she did this. "But you know things," Harriet countered. "You know the land, survival skills, practical matters. That is worth teaching too." On the second evening after dinner, Harriet asked if he would walk with her again. They had fallen into a pattern of evening walks by the creek, conversations that ranged from trivial to profound. Zachary found himself talking more than he had in years, telling her stories from his past that he had thought he wanted to forget. He told her about his sister Emily, how she had loved flowers and had tried to plant a garden in front of their house in Kansas, despite the difficult soil. He told her about his parents, the way his father had taught him to shoot, his mother's terrible singing voice that she used anyway while doing chores. And he told her about Anna, about the plans they had made, the life they had imagined together before consumption had stolen her away piece by piece. Harriet listened to all of it, and she did not offer empty platitudes or try to make it hurt less. She just listened, and sometimes she took his hand, and her presence made the memories less unbearable somehow. "You think you will ever forgive yourself?" she asked one evening as they sat on a large rock by the creek, watching the sun set. "Forgive myself for what? For surviving when they did not." The words hit Zachary like a physical blow because she had identified something he had never admitted, even to himself. He did feel guilty for still being alive when everyone he loved was dead. It felt wrong somehow, unfair, like he had stolen life that should have gone to better people. "I do not know," he said hoarsely. Harriet squeezed his hand. "They would not want you to suffer forever, Zachary. They would want you to live." It was the first time she had used his given name, and something about the intimacy of it made his chest tight. "You do not know that." "Yes, I do," Harriet said firmly, "because I know what it is like to love someone. And when you love someone, you want them to be happy, even if you cannot be there to share it. Your parents, your sister, Anna, they loved you, which means they would want you to find joy again, not spend the rest of your life punishing yourself for being alive." Zachary felt something hot behind his eyes, a pressure that resolved into tears he had not shed in years. He tried to blink them away, ashamed, but Harriet saw. She shifted closer, wrapping her arms around him, and Zachary found himself breaking, all the grief he had held at bay for so long pouring out in harsh, painful sobs. She held him through it all, one hand rubbing gentle circles on his back, murmuring soft words he could not quite hear but felt nonetheless. He cried for his parents, for Emily, for Anna, for all the years he had wasted being half alive. And when the storm finally passed, leaving him exhausted and hollowed out, he felt lighter somehow, as if the tears had washed away some burden he had been carrying. "I am sorry," he said, pulling away and scrubbing at his face with his hands. "Don't be," Harriet said. "Grief is not weakness, Zachary. It is love with nowhere to go. You needed to let it out." They sat together as the stars began to appear, and Zachary realized something had fundamentally changed. He had let Harriet see him at his most vulnerable, had shown her the broken parts he kept hidden, and she had not recoiled. She had held him through it, had offered comfort without judgment. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Harriet was quiet for a long moment. "Because I see you," she said finally. "The real you underneath all the walls you have built, and I like what I see. You are kind and brave and so much stronger than you know. You have been through terrible things and they have not destroyed you. That matters." "I am not brave," Zachary said. "I have been running for years." "You are brave because you are still here," Harriet corrected. "You are brave because even after losing everything, you kept going. And you are brave because right now you are letting me in, even though you are terrified. That is the bravest thing of all." Zachary turned to look at her, and in the fading light she was beautiful, not in the showy way some women were, but in a quiet, steady way that made something in his chest ache. "I am going to hurt you," he said. "I do not know how yet, but I will. I hurt everyone. You did not hurt them, Harriet said gently. They died. That is not the same thing. And yes, maybe you will hurt me someday, or maybe I will hurt you. That is the risk we take when we care about people. But Zachary, the alternative is this half-life you have been living, and I do not think you can bear it much longer. She was right. He had reached some kind of breaking point without even realizing it, had pushed his isolation as far as it could go. He could either take a step toward something different or shatter entirely. And looking at Harriet, at the hope and affection in her eyes, he found himself wanting to try. I do not know how to do this, he said again, but this time it was not a warning. It was a request for help. Harriet smiled, soft and understanding. We will figure it out together, one day at a time. The 2 days Zachary had promised turned into a week, then 2. He took a job helping Charles with the ranch work, fixing fences and moving cattle, work that was honest and straightforward. Charles paid him fairly and seemed glad to have the extra hands. Martha treated him like family, always making sure he had enough to eat, mending a tear in his shirt without being asked. And Harriet taught the children during the day and spent her evenings with Zachary. They talked about everything and nothing. She told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her parents and how much she missed them, about the students she had taught before coming west. He told her about the places he had been, the things he had seen, slowly opening up about parts of his life he had thought he would never share with anyone. They were careful not to touch too much, mindful of propriety, but sometimes their hands would brush, or Zachary would help her over a rough patch of ground and let his hand linger on her arm. Each small touch felt significant, charged with possibility. One afternoon, Zachary was repairing the schoolroom door while Harriet organized books on a shelf. She was humming softly to herself, and the sound made him smile despite himself. When had he started smiling again? He was not sure, but it was happening more and more. "Can I ask you something personal?" Harriet said, turning to look at him. "You usually do anyway." She made a face at him, playful, and his smile widened. "Have you thought about what comes next? After you leave here, I mean." The question sobered him. He had been trying not to think about leaving, even though he knew he could not stay indefinitely. "I suppose I will go back to what I was doing before. Take jobs where I find them, keep moving." "Is that what you want?" Zachary set down his tools and looked at her directly. "No," he admitted. "But wanting something different and knowing how to get it are not the same thing." Harriet crossed the room until she was standing directly in front of him. They were close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, could smell the floral scent he had come to associate with her. "What if you stayed?" she asked softly. "Not here necessarily, but nearby. You could build something, a life that is not about running from pain but about building toward something good." "With you," Zachary said. It was not quite a question. "If you wanted," Harriet said, and he could hear the vulnerability in her voice, the risk she was taking by asking. "I know it is fast. We have only known each other a few weeks. But Zachary, I care about you, more than I probably should, and I think you care about me too." He did. Somewhere along the way, Harriet had slipped past his defenses and made herself essential. The thought of riding away and never seeing her again made his chest feel hollow. But the thought of staying, of building a life with her, terrified him. "What if something happens to you?" he asked, his voice rough. "What if I let myself love you and then I lose you?" "What if you do not lose me?" Harriet countered. "What if we have 50 years together? Would you give that up just because you are afraid of how it might end?" "I do not know how to do this," Zachary said for what felt like the 100th time. Harriet reached up and cupped his face in her hands, gentle and sure. "Then learn. Stay and learn. We will figure it out together." Zachary covered her hands with his own, and the decision crystallized in his mind. He could keep running, keep holding the world at arm's length and be safe. Or he could take the most terrifying risk of his life and reach for happiness with both hands. "I will need to find work," he said. "Something stable. I cannot keep drifting if I am going to stay." The hope that blazed in Harriet's eyes made something in Zachary's chest swell. "Charles mentioned the other day that the ranch next to this one is looking for a foreman. The owner is getting older and needs someone to manage the daily operations. It pays well and comes with a house. A house. A job. A future. The things Zachary had given up years ago suddenly within reach again. "I do not know anything about managing a ranch." "You know cattle, you know horses, you know how to work," Harriet said. "And you are good with people when you let yourself be. You could do this, Zachary. If you wanted to. And you would stay at the Fletcher Ranch. Teaching, for now," Harriet said. "It is only a few miles from the neighboring ranch. We could see each other often, and later, when we are ready, we could figure out something more permanent." She was being careful not to presume too much, not to push him faster than he could handle. Zachary appreciated that more than he could say. But he also knew what he wanted, what he had maybe wanted since that first day when she had looked at him with such clear-eyed understanding. "I love you," he said, and the words felt rusty from disuse but true. "I did not want to, I tried not to, but I do." Harriet's smile was radiant. "I love you too. And I know you are scared, but Zachary, I promise I am going to do everything I can to stay alive and healthy for as long as possible. I am going to fight for every day we get together. Can you do the same?" "Yes," Zachary said, and it felt like a vow. "Yes, I can do that." She stretched up on her toes and Zachary bent down and their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was his first kiss in years, and it felt like coming home after a long exile. When they pulled apart, Zachary rested his forehead against Harriet's, both of them breathing hard. "We should probably talk to Charles," Harriet said, though she made no move to step away. "About courting properly. I do not want people to think I am improper." "You are the most proper person I have ever met," Zachary said, and he could not quite keep the amusement from his voice. "Yes, well, I would like to keep it that way," Harriet said primly, but she was smiling. "Come on." They found Charles in the barn, checking on a horse that had thrown a shoe earlier. He looked up when they entered, and something in their expressions must have given them away because he grinned. "Finally, I was wondering how long you two were going to dance around each other." "Were we that obvious?" Harriet asked, blushing. "To anyone with eyes," Charles said. "I assume you are here to ask my permission to court her properly, Sullivan," Zachary straightened. "Yes, sir, and to ask about that foreman position you mentioned on the neighboring ranch. If it is still available." "It is, and you would be good for it," Charles said. "Old Garrett, who owns the place, is a friend. I will put in a word for you, tell him you are trustworthy and a hard worker. He will want to interview you himself, but I think he will be pleased." "Thank you," Zachary said sincerely. "Thank Martha, not me," Charles said. "She was the one who suggested I mention it to you, said she could see you were a man who needed a reason to stay put, and that maybe Miss Monroe here was that reason." Zachary felt his ears heat. "Your wife is a perceptive woman." "That she is," Charles agreed. "Now, about courting. You will treat Miss Monroe with respect at all times. No being alone together unchaperoned for extended periods, and I expect you to be clear about your intentions. She is under my protection while she is working here, and I take that seriously." "I understand," Zachary said. "My intentions are marriage when she is ready." Harriet made a small sound of surprise and delight. Zachary took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I am done running," he told her. "From the past, from pain, from the possibility of happiness. If you will have me, I want to build a life with you." "Yes," Harriet said, tears shining in her eyes. "Yes, of course, yes." Charles cleared his throat. "Well then, I suppose congratulations are in order. We will have to celebrate at dinner tonight." The interview with Garrett went well. He was a gruff man in his 60s with arthritis that made the daily work of running a ranch increasingly difficult. Zachary's experience with cattle and horses impressed him, and Charles's recommendation carried weight. By the end of the conversation, Zachary had a job and a small house on the property. The house needed work, but it had good bones. 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, a well nearby, and a small barn for animals. Zachary threw himself into fixing it up, patching the roof, replacing broken windows, building furniture. It felt good to create something, to work toward a future instead of just surviving from day to day. Harriet came to visit whenever she could, always with Martha or one of the older Fletcher children as chaperone. She brought curtains she had sewn, suggestions for where things should go, her own hopeful vision for what their home could become. It was strange and wonderful to hear her say "our home," to have someone invested in his future, planning for a shared life. They were married in October, 6 months after they had met. It was a simple ceremony held at the Fletcher Ranch with both families present, along with neighbors and friends from the surrounding area. Martha had helped Harriet make a wedding dress from cream-colored fabric, simple but beautiful. Zachary wore his best clothes, cleaned and pressed, his hair cut neat. When Harriet walked toward him, her eyes bright with happiness, Zachary felt something slot into place in his chest. This was right. This was what he had been missing, what he had been afraid to reach for. She took his hands, and they spoke their vows in front of the small gathering, promising to love and honor each other through whatever came. The kiss they shared as husband and wife was chaste, appropriate for the audience, but it promised more for when they were alone. There was music and dancing and food, and Zachary found himself laughing more than he had in years, swept up in the joy of the celebration. That night, in their little house that Zachary had worked so hard to make ready, Harriet came to him. They were both nervous, both aware of the significance of the step they were taking, but they loved each other, and that made everything feel right. Zachary was careful with her, gentle, attentive to her needs and responses. Harriet was brave and curious, matching his tenderness with her own. They learned each other slowly, discovering what brought pleasure, what made the other gasp or sigh. It was nothing like the frantic coupling Zachary remembered from his youth. This was sweeter, more profound, an act of trust and love. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Harriet's head on his chest, his hand stroking slowly through her unbound hair. Zachary felt something he had not felt in years: peace. Not the numbness he had mistaken for peace, but genuine contentment, the knowledge that he was exactly where he was meant to be. "Thank you," he said softly. Harriet tilted her head to look up at him. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For seeing past what I was trying to be and finding something worth loving." Harriet smiled and pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "You were always worth loving, Zachary. You just needed to believe it yourself." They built a life together over the following months. Zachary managed Garrett's ranch, and he was good at it. The men who worked under him respected his fairness and his knowledge. Garrett himself was pleased with how smoothly things ran, and he told Zachary more than once that hiring him was the best decision he had made in years. Harriet continued teaching at the Fletcher Ranch, and in the evenings she would come home to Zachary. They would eat dinner together, talking about their days, making plans for the future. On weekends, they would ride out into the desert, exploring the landscape, finding beauty in the harsh terrain. Slowly, Zachary began to heal. The nightmares about losing everyone he loved became less frequent. He stopped waiting for tragedy to strike, stopped bracing himself for loss. Harriet's steady presence, her practical optimism, her absolute refusal to let him slip back into isolation, All of it worked on him like water on stone, gradually wearing away the worst of his fears. He made friends with some of the other ranchers and their families. He went to church sometimes, sitting beside Harriet in the pew, listening to sermons about grace and redemption that actually started to mean something. He was part of a community in a way he had not been since childhood, woven into the fabric of other people's lives. A year and a half after their wedding, Harriet told him she was pregnant. Zachary's first reaction was fear, immediate and overwhelming. A child meant another person to love, another person he could lose. But Harriet saw the fear in his face and took his hands in hers. "I am healthy and strong," she said firmly. "And we have good medical care available, better than most people out here. I am going to be fine, and our baby is going to be fine. You have to trust that, Zachary. You have to trust that good things can happen too." He did trust her. Over the past 18 months, she had proven herself to be steady and reliable, someone who kept her promises. So he took a breath and pushed the fear down, and he let himself be excited instead. The pregnancy progressed normally. Harriet continued teaching until she was 7 months along, then reluctantly agreed to rest more. Zachary hovered, probably too much, but Harriet bore his concern with patience and occasional amusement. Martha came to visit often, bringing advice and reassurance, and Zachary was grateful for her calming presence. On a warm June evening in 1886, Harriet went into labor. Martha was there to help, along with the local midwife, a competent woman named Sarah who had delivered dozens of babies. Zachary was banished to the main room while the women worked, and he paced, terrified. Every cry of pain from Harriet made him flinch. He was remembering Anna, how illness had ravaged her, how he had been helpless to stop it. He was remembering his sister Emily, caught in violence he could not prevent. All the old fears were back, whispering that he had been a fool to hope that suffering was inevitable. But then he heard it, the sharp, indignant wail of a newborn baby. The sound cut through his spiral of fear, and Zachary froze, hardly daring to breathe. Martha emerged a few minutes later, her face tired but happy. "You have a son," she said, "and Harriet is fine. She is asking for you." Zachary practically ran into the bedroom. Harriet was propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and as Zachary approached, he could see a small red face, eyes squinted shut, mouth open in complaint. "Meet your son," Harriet said softly. Zachary sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the baby with wonder. He was so small, so fragile, and Zachary was terrified he would break him. But when Harriet shifted the baby into his arms, showing him how to support the head, something fierce and protective surged through Zachary's chest. This was his son, his and Harriet's, a person who existed because they loved each other, because they had chosen to build a life together. The baby opened his eyes, unfocused but already searching, and Zachary felt his heart crack open in a way that was painful and beautiful at the same time. "He is perfect," Zachary said, his voice thick. "He is," Harriet agreed. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names, but nothing had felt quite right. Now, looking at his son, Zachary thought of his own father, a good man who had taught him to work hard and treat people fairly. "James," he said. "After my father." Harriet smiled. "James Sullivan, I like it." Little James was a fussy baby at first, colicky and demanding. There were long nights when he would not sleep, when Zachary and Harriet took turns walking him, rocking him, trying everything they could think of to soothe him. Zachary was exhausted in a way he had never been before, but it was a good exhaustion, born of purpose and love. Watching Harriet with their son, seeing the tenderness and patience she showed even when James was screaming at 2 in the morning, Zachary fell in love with her all over again. She was everything he was not, naturally nurturing, endlessly patient, able to find joy in even the hardest moments. But she told him he was wrong when he said so. "You are patient," she insisted, "and nurturing in your own way. You just show it differently. James knows you love him. Look how he calms when you hold him." It was true that James seemed to respond to Zachary's presence, settling when his father picked him up, finding comfort in the steady beat of his heart. Zachary had not known it was possible to love someone this much, to feel this vulnerable and this strong at the same time. As James grew, Zachary taught him things: how to ride a horse before he could walk steady, how to recognize different bird calls, how to find water in the desert. Harriet taught him letters and numbers, read to him every night, filled his head with stories and songs. Between them, they raised a child who was curious and brave and kind. 2 years after James was born, Harriet had another baby, this time a daughter they named Rose after Zachary's mother. Rose was calmer than her brother, an easy baby who smiled constantly and seemed delighted by everything. Zachary adored her, this tiny girl with Harriet's green eyes and his own dark hair. Life was full in a way Zachary had never imagined it could be. The house they had started in was too small, so he built an addition, 2 more bedrooms and a proper kitchen. The work was hard but satisfying, creating space for their growing family. Garrett, the ranch owner, grew older and more frail. One day, he called Zachary to his house for a conversation. "You have been like a son to me these past years," Garrett said. "I do not have children of my own, no one to leave this place to. I want you to have it when I am gone. You have earned it." Zachary was stunned. "Sir, I cannot accept that." "You can and you will," Garrett said firmly. "You have made this ranch profitable again, made it into something to be proud of. And I know you will take care of the land and the animals and the people who work here. That is all I want. Promise me you will keep it going." "I promise," Zachary said, moved beyond words. Garrett died peacefully in his sleep 6 months later. The will was clear. The ranch, the land, the livestock, all of it went to Zachary. Overnight, Zachary went from hired foreman to ranch owner, a position he had never dreamed of achieving. With ownership came responsibility, but also opportunity. Zachary expanded the operation, bought more cattle, hired more hands. The ranch thrived under his management, becoming one of the most successful in the region. He was fair to his workers, paying them well and treating them with respect. And in return, they were loyal and hardworking. Harriet eventually stopped teaching at the Fletcher Ranch to focus on raising their children and helping manage the business side of the ranch operation. She kept the books, handled correspondence, and made their house a home that was warm and welcoming. People in the community respected her, came to her for advice and help. The years passed, marked by the ordinary miracles of family life. James learned to rope cattle and ride like he was born in the saddle. Rose was quieter, preferring books to outdoor work, but she had her father's steady calm and her mother's sharp intelligence. When she was 10, she announced she wanted to be a doctor, and neither Zachary nor Harriet saw any reason why she should not pursue that dream. They had 2 more children, another son named Thomas, and finally another daughter, Lily. The house was always full of noise and activity, of children running and playing, of laughter and occasional arguments. It was everything Zachary had been afraid to want, everything he had convinced himself would only lead to suffering. And yes, there were hard times. Years when drought killed cattle and money was tight. Illnesses that had Zachary pacing with worry until fever broke and color returned to a child's cheeks. Accidents that could have been tragic but through luck or grace were only frightening. But suffering, when it came, was bearable because he did not face it alone. Harriet was always there, steady and strong, reminding him that hard times passed, that their love was enough to weather any storm. And she was right. Every time. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Zachary and Harriet rode out to the spot where he had first told her he loved her, a overlook above the creek on the Fletcher property. The Fletchers had sold the ranch years ago and moved to California to be near Martha's sister, but the new owners did not mind them visiting occasionally. They sat together on the same rock where Zachary had once cried in her arms, and he thought about how much had changed. He was 46 years old now, with gray starting to thread through his dark hair. Harriet was 43, laugh lines at the corners of her eyes, her hair still that beautiful auburn but shorter now, more practical for ranch life. "You ever regret it?" Zachary asked. "Choosing me, choosing this life?" Harriet looked at him with surprise. "Never, not for 1 second. Do you?" Zachary shook his head. "No, I just think sometimes about how close I came to riding away that first day, to never seeing you again. If I had left before breakfast that morning, if I had not agreed to take you to the Fletchers, if I had said no to staying those 2 extra days, we would have missed all of this." "But you did not ride away," Harriet said gently. "You chose to stay, even though you were terrified. That was the bravest thing you have ever done, and I am so grateful for it." "I thought attachment meant suffering," Zachary said. "I spent years believing that, building my whole life around avoiding it. And now I know that attachment can mean suffering," Zachary said slowly. "But it also means joy and purpose, and love so deep it changes who you are. The suffering is not gone. I still worry about losing you, about something happening to our children. But Harriet, the suffering ended in your arms that day by the creek. Not because the fear went away, but because you taught me that love is stronger than fear, that connection is worth the risk." Harriet reached for his hand, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. After a while, she said, "I am proud of you. Of the man you have become, the father you are, the life we have built. You were so broken when we met, and you could have stayed broken. But you chose to heal. You chose us. That matters." Zachary brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I chose us because you made me believe it was possible. You saved me, Harriet. I do not say that lightly. You saved my life." "We saved each other," Harriet corrected. "I was running from grief just as much as you were. We found each other at exactly the right time and helped each other become whole again." They rode back to the ranch as stars began to appear, to the house that was full of life and noise and love. Their children were all there. James, now 24 and helping run the ranch alongside his father. Rose, 22 and away at medical school but home for a visit. Thomas, 16 and full of restless energy. And Lily, just 13 but already showing signs of the remarkable woman she would become. Dinner that night was chaotic and perfect, everyone talking over each other, sharing stories and jokes. Zachary sat at the head of the table, Harriet on his right, and he looked around at the faces of his family. His family. People who existed because he had been brave enough to reach for happiness, because he had let Harriet teach him that love was not the enemy. After the children had scattered to their various activities, Zachary and Harriet sat together on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the darkness. She leaned against him and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding her close. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what? For not giving up on me. For believing I could be more than what I thought I was, for loving me." Harriet turned to kiss him, soft and sweet. "Always," she promised. "For all the years we have left, I will always love you." And she did. They grew old together on that ranch in Nevada, watching their children grow and have families of their own. James married a woman from town and gave them grandchildren. Rose became a doctor and opened a practice in Reno, bringing modern medicine to people who needed it. Thomas eventually left to seek adventure, but he wrote often and visited when he could. Lily became a teacher like her mother, carrying on the tradition of education and care. Zachary and Harriet were fixtures in the community, the couple everyone pointed to as an example of enduring love. They had their arguments over the years, their disagreements and frustrations, because no marriage was perfect. But they always came back together, always chose each other, and that was what mattered. On a warm autumn evening in 1910, when Zachary was 70 and Harriet was 67, they sat together in the same spot on the porch where they had spent so many evenings. Harriet's health had been declining, her heart growing weaker, and they both knew their time was growing short. "I am not ready," Zachary said, his voice breaking. "I am not ready to lose you." "I know," Harriet said, holding his hand. "But Zachary, we had 44 years together. 44 wonderful years. We raised 4 beautiful children. We built something real and good. That is more than most people ever get." "It is not enough," Zachary said. "It will never be enough." Harriet smiled, the same smile she had given him that first day in McGill when she had asked for his help. "It will have to be. But remember what I taught you all those years ago. The suffering will pass. The love stays. Even after I am gone, the love stays." She died in her sleep 2 weeks later, peacefully, with Zachary holding her hand. The pain of losing her was devastating, the worst thing Zachary had ever experienced, and for a few dark days he thought he would not survive it. But then their children came and their grandchildren, and they surrounded him with love. They reminded him of all the good years, all the joy Harriet had brought into his life. They showed him that she lived on in them, in their kindness and strength and compassion. And Zachary remembered what Harriet had taught him, that attachment did not mean suffering, not really. It meant being brave enough to love fully, even knowing that loss would come eventually. It meant choosing connection over isolation, joy over numbness, life over mere survival. The suffering of losing Harriet was real and deep, but it was not the same as the hollow ache he had carried for so many years before meeting her. This was grief born of love, sharp and clean, and underneath it was gratitude for every moment they had shared. Zachary lived for another 5 years after Harriet's death, and he spent them surrounded by family, working the ranch with James, watching his grandchildren grow. He told them stories about their grandmother, keeping her memory alive, making sure they knew what an extraordinary woman she had been. When he died in 1915, peacefully in his sleep at 75, his last thoughts were of Harriet, of the way she had looked at him with such hope and determination, refusing to let him disappear into isolation, of how she had taken his broken pieces and helped him forge them into something whole. He had believed attachment meant suffering, had structured his entire life around that belief. But Harriet had shown him the truth, that suffering came from fear and isolation, and it ended in the arms of someone brave enough to love you. She had ended his suffering not by taking away the possibility of pain, but by showing him that love was worth the risk, that connection was worth the vulnerability, that life was meant to be lived fully, not merely endured. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the years he had wasted in isolation, but the decades he had spent truly living, truly loving, truly alive. Harriet had given him that gift, and he had treasured it until his very last breath. And in the small cemetery on the ranch, where Zachary was buried beside Harriet, their shared headstone bore a simple inscription that told the story of their love. Beloved husband and wife. She taught him that love conquers fear. He learned the lesson well. Their family continued to thrive, generation after generation, all of them carrying forward the legacy of courage and connection that Zachary and Harriet had created. The ranch stayed in the family, a testament to what could be built when you chose hope over fear, love over isolation. And every spring, when the desert bloomed with unexpected flowers, someone in the family would stand by those graves and remember the story of the cowboy who believed attachment meant suffering, and the teacher who taught him that suffering ended not in isolation, but in the brave and beautiful risk of opening your heart to love.